I know I say this a lot, but Batman really does have the greatest rogues gallery in all of comics, and the versions of these villains seen in Batman the Animated Series were arguably the definitive takes. The creative team took colourful, often two-dimensional villains and gave them real emotional weight, and the best example of this is Two-Face. In the comics, he was a walking dichotomy, flipping between good and evil on the toss of a coin. He'd go from robbing banks 1 minute to donating all of the loot to charity the next, all because his face had been disfigured and his life upended. I've made a bunch of videos about the version seen in Batman the Animated Series whose backstory was far more grounded, and I really think that he was the best villain in that show. While Harvey Dent was presented as the shining district attorney, out to take down Gotham's organised crime lords, he had a secret. When he was a child, he'd got into a fight with a bully, and shortly afterwards the bully ended up in hospital. He had appendicitis, but Harvey blamed himself and vowed never to show his anger again. Bottling his emotions led to the emergence of a split personality, his rage given form as Big Bad Harv. When Rupert Thorne learned of Dent's condition, he threatened to go to the press, and Dent unleashed Big Bad Harv on the rotund mobster. In the struggle, he was caught in an explosion, disfiguring half of his body, and Two-Face was born. Now, Two-Face is not your typical villain. While he did commit crimes, he only ever targeted businesses that were fronts for Thorne. In his own way, Two-Face was continuing Dent's mission to end organised crime, just from a slightly different angle. He was more pragmatic, knowing that you'd never fully erase crime, so he decided to position himself as the ultimate mob boss in Gotham. At the same time, he tried to take control of the GCPD, perfectly fitting his dual nature. Two-Face started out as a criminal with a code, one still tethered to Harvey Dent's ideals, but over time he became more callous. In fact, by the time of the new Batman adventures, he had abandoned that mission, and I want to talk about why this happened. While TNBA redesigned all of the rogues for the more streamlined art style, Two-Face was one of the few characters who went through minimal changes, partly because his black and white suit design was already very streamlined from what had come before. The only significant change was that his disfigurement became less colourful. No more big red lip or massive yellow eye. His face still had a blue tint to it, but it was paler. And that wasn't the only change he went through. His approach to crime had also completely shifted. He no longer cared about controlling Gotham's underworld. He didn't try to take over the GCPD or City Hall. Instead, he diversified his interests. In Batman Adventures The Lost Years, set between the end of BTAS and the start of TNBA, Two-Face abandons the facade of a mission. He's no longer targeting corrupt institutions, he has become one. Running a drug operation out of South America, smuggling poison into the city he once vowed to clean up. And in the episode Sins of the Father, he goes further, threatening Gotham with a dirty bomb. This isn't order through crime, this is chaos, plain and simple. Now, I know that some people refuse to accept the tie-in comics as canon, but this series was written by Hilary J. Bader, one of the writers from the new Batman adventures, and it adapted the TNBA episodes Old Wounds and Sins of the Father. And as I always say, if the tie-in comic was by someone that worked on the shows, then it counts, no questions asked. You could argue that the TNBA writers decided to just disregard everything that had come before and have Two-Face be a more traditional villain, but I actually view this era as a very significant step in his development. As I mentioned earlier, when Harvey Dent became Two-Face, he was being blackmailed by the gangster Rupert Thorne. Dent very deliberately chose to retreat inside of himself and allowed his violent alternate personality to come out and deal with the problem. However, when Dent was disfigured in the explosion, Big Bad Harv retreated in horror, and Two-Face was born. Keep this point about retreating personalities in mind, it will be important. And a significant distinction to make is that Two-Face is not just Big Bad Harv with a messed up face. Big Bad Harv had a very limited range of emotions, and his response to everything was violence. There's a subtle distinction between the voice of Big Bad Harv and Two-Face. Big Bad Harv growls when he speaks. He's pure anger, nothing else. Two-Face has a softer yet gravelly voice with more emotional range. They sound very similar when Two-Face is angry, but the key point is that Two-Face has depth. And he makes it very clear that Two-Face is a separate person when his fiancée Grace calls him Harvey. He says, "I am Two-Face now." Not Big Bad Harv, not "we are Two-Face," just "I am Two-Face now." Singular. Absolute. You could argue that Two-Face is Harvey Dent and Big Bad Harv at the same time, but when I spoke to Two-Face Part 1 and 2's director Kevin Altieri, he commended me for picking up that Two-Face is a different person to Big Bad Harv and Harvey Dent, not a composite. Harvey Dent is still inside of him somewhere, but he has retreated. Big Bad Harv might be in there somewhere too, but he was never seen again. Two-Face is a separate personality, not Harvey Dent and Big Bad Harv battling each other for dominance. And speaking of Grace, she was vital to his recovery, as I discussed in a separate video about her. Harvey Dent was deeply insecure and he often defined his self-worth through his relationships, which partly explains why he rushed into marriage time and time again. And not to turn into a series of cheap plugs for other videos, but I have already done a video about her relationship with Harvey Dent and where it all went wrong. I've linked to it in the info button in this video's description, so go check that out when you've got a moment. Grace was always able to snap Harvey out of it, and as Two-Face, she was the only part of his old life that he longed for. And when she left, he really was alone. The Adventures of Batman and Robin episode Second Chance showed us that Harvey Dent was able to make progress even without Grace. His doctors felt he was psychologically prepared enough for his face to be fixed, which would be the catalyst for banishing Two-Face from his mind for good. But things didn't go to plan. Two-Face sabotaged the procedure, kidnapping Dent, and when Batman caught up with him, he tried to take his own life. Fortunately, Batman was there to save him. When we last saw him, he was being carted back into Arkham, thankful to his friend Bruce Wayne for never giving up on him. So when he returned in the new Batman adventures as a murderous drug dealer who planned to destroy the city, it felt a little off, like something had snapped. And maybe it had. Because this betrayal of Harvey's old ideals would eventually trigger the rise of something new, a third personality called the Judge. But we still weren't directly told what had happened to bring about such a big change in Two-Face. Reading between the lines, we know he was resentful of Harvey after he tried to banish him from his mind in Second Chance. Perhaps that's what made him change his approach. If Dent wasn't going to play fair, then neither was he. And I think that does work as an explanation, but there's another story that took place in the comic books that perfectly explained what happened. In 1996, DC published Batman Black and White #1, an anthology comic featuring several short stories by prominent comic book creators. And one of the stories in that first issue was Two of a Kind by Bruce Timm. For those keeping track at home, Batman the Animated Series' final episode aired in September of 1995, and the first episode of the new Batman Adventures aired in September of 1997, so this slots in perfectly. It also helps that Timm decided to use the classic BTAS design for Bruce Wayne and Harvey Dent, which makes it fit in very nicely after the events of Second Chance. Warner Brothers even turned it into a motion comic, a crudely animated short video, which you can watch for free on YouTube. I've linked to it in the info button, but please don't forget to finish watching this video, yeah? The story opens with the news that Harvey Dent is nearing the end of his treatment. Through extensive cutting-edge therapy, he's been able to banish Two-Face from his mind, so now all that remains is the operation to repair his face. The headlines also note that Harvey found love with his doctor, Marilyn Crane, and the two planned to marry. Third time's the charm, right, Harvey? Harvey was healing, he had a new job, a new love, and a future within reach, but fate had one last cruel twist in store. Marilyn had a twin sister named Madeline. She was unstable, volatile, and twisted by resentment. They were the living embodiment of his inner split: kindness versus bitterness, care versus hate, love versus lust, and so on. And Harvey couldn't resist Madeline. He gave in to temptation and had a brief affair. When he tried to call it off, Madeline gave in to her madness, murdering her sister and leaving a message written in blood. Now it's just the two of us. Harvey was crestfallen, utterly destroyed, and at the lowest point of his life. Every part of him screamed out for revenge, but he couldn't do it. He was cured, but he knew someone who could. He grabbed burning coals from his fireplace and burnt the left side of his face, bringing Two-Face back. Harvey completely retreated inside of himself and gave up on living a happy, fulfilled life. Harvey brought Two-Face back and let him deal with Madeline, although the irony was that Two-Face didn't want to come back, and he waited for Batman to come cart him off to Arkham. I think that this story is a key, often overlooked part of the DCAU version of Two-Face's story, not just because it explains why his disfigurement changed, but also why his attitude was completely different. Harvey Dent gave up on being a good person and completely handed the reins to Two-Face, who then went on to expand his criminal empire with no regard for who he hurt in the process. Harvey eventually mustered the strength to challenge Two-Face by creating the Judge, but he still couldn't reclaim full control. And as we see in the direct-to-DVD Justice League vs. the Fatal Five film, even years later, Dent is still locked away in Arkham, slowly making progress, but never quite overcoming his dark side. Two-Face was never just a tragedy of disfigurement or madness, he was a tragedy of choice. Harvey Dent was cured. He had his life back, the monster was silent, and his scars were gone. But when grief tore him apart, he didn't fight to hold on. He just let go. He let the worst part of himself step forward and take over, not because he was forced to, but because it was easier. And maybe deep down, because he wanted to. Okay, that's it for this week's essay. If you liked the video, don't forget to like, share, subscribe, leave a comment, tell all your friends about me. You know how YouTube works. If you really enjoyed the video and have the means, please consider making use of the thanks button to send a buck or two my way, because every little helps. I offer channel memberships for $1.99 a month. This will get you early access to my weekly video essay, priority responses to your comments, members-only videos, custom emojis, and an icon on your profile indicating that you're one of my people. And special thanks to my channel members. Everyone who was a member at the time of this video's creation is listed on the screen right now. If you want to see your name amongst all these wonderful people, join the channel now. Next time. I'll be back on Friday to talk about the winners of my recent Batman Beyond villain poll, the pseudo-individualist Jokers, and how in trying so hard to stand out they really just came across as pathetic tryhards. And then next Monday I'm going back to Beware the Batman to talk about a great fighter who was reimagined as Ra's al Ghul's Fist. It's time to talk about Lady Shiva. Hope to see you then.